We're on chapter 22, section 4, Mobilizing for War. What war are we talking about? World War I. As you recall from the previous video, certain things happened in America. It was 2 years into the war in Europe and why America had to enter the war. And we know some of the things that happened. One of the things was the sinking of our ships. Not only was the Lusitania sunk, which was a British with 100 Americans dying, but basically Germany had declared unrestricted sinking of our ships. If we're in the zone, in the war zone, they will sink our ships. Plus, not only that would happen, but also the Zimmerman note that went from Germany to Mexico, to asking Mexico to support Germany against the United States. That if Mexico would come into this war and basically winning this war, Germany winning this war against America, that they would give territories back to Mexico. They would give Mexico Texas and New Mexico and Arizona. So, wow, in the midst of that, see, Germany knew that we were at turmoil with Mexico in some instances, especially with Woodrow Wilson. Do you remember Ponce Villa, the guy came into America and actually murdered some Americans running back into Mexico, and we never could actually find him in the midst of all this, and they went through 2 revolutionary leaders in Mexico, and Wilson in the midst was trying to help them with peace and peace with America, and so Germany, knowing that we had problems in Mexico, thought, we're just going to come in there and see if Mexico wants to fight against America. So that was the big final decision. And it was printed in all of our newspapers so that every American knew that Germany now was basically taking up arms and trying to get Mexico to revolt and come into our land and attack us in our homeland, right? So that was a big decision in the midst of all of this. So we saw all those things leading up to the war. So now we're going to talk about mobilizing war. How would we get ready for war? How would we mobilize our army? And how would Americans react? Very important. Raising an army. So many men enlisted of their own will, and this greatly increased the size of our army and our National Guard. Now, the National Guard was ready for war. The Selective Service Act was passed 6 weeks after the declaration of war. And this Selective Service Act required now that all men between the ages of 21 and 30 to register with the local draft boards. Later on, they upped this to ages 18 to 45. So as if you were just 18 years old, you would have to, a young man would have to register for the draft, to be drafted into the war. So 24 million men were registered for the draft. And these were divided into classes. Unmarried men without dependents, without children, were the first ones called, and they were called to physical examinations to examine to make sure that they were healthy enough to be a soldier in the war. So, and you can here's a picture of Woodrow Wilson blindfolded, and he's picking through the draft, picking out those men that would be put on draft and go into the army and sent into the war, right? So this was a draft lottery. And here's, as we go on here, every man must register September 12th, 1918. We're talking about the year 1918 now. So, and here they are, men coming in and being drafted. It says, step into your place, come into the war. So this is a picture of a registration card. It just happens to be Alvin York's, which he became a famous hero of the war. So anyway, raising an army. Now, getting the men through the draft and bringing them into, they needed to be trained in some way, right? So the United States Army and the National Guard recruits were sent to these training camps. There were 32 of these camps in the United States. And there was a student army training corps for training officers in the colleges also. to train. We not only needed young men to come and be soldiers, but we needed officers too. So, but for the first time in history, women too were admitted to the United States Armed Forces, but only as nurses and clerical workers. They would not be in combat unless they were on the combat lines as nurses. In a few months, the Army increased from about 200,000 men to 4 million. That's a huge jump. 4 million men were registered, and 4 million men were ready to fight in this war. You can see some pictures of the training camps there. Financing the war. So World War I was extremely expensive, more expensive than any other war we'd ever been in thus far. The total cost would be $33.5 billion, not counting veterans benefits out. That wasn't counting any of the benefits after the war, but during the war, it would be $33.5 billion. At that time, it's a lot of money. 1/3 of the cost was met through taxation. So basically, they would have war taxes to pay for this. The rest was on long-term bonds. So when the war taxes didn't accumulate enough money, they would have to sell bonds, war bonds, to make money. In October 1917, Congress put forth a new tax program to help finance the war. Income taxes would be increased, and businesses would also be levied in excess profits on different taxes and on profits exceeding the pre-war, so everything would be increased. And Congress also levied an inheritance tax that they hadn't done before, taxes on luxury items. So taxes went up high on things such as tobacco and theater tickets. Anything that was luxury would be taxed even more. So to finance the war, taxes went up. You see here's pictures. The taxing gasoline, taxing the war tax, here's a picture of the money, and you see that I kind of like this picture, so I put in, see the tank. I have a picture of the money and then a tank in the back to finance the war. Smash the axes, pay your taxes. Remember, central axes, what they called our enemies, and to smash the axes, pay your taxes, they're saying. Liberty loan drives. The Americans demonstrated patriotism through response to Liberty loan drives. The Victory loan drive was conducted in 1919. About 65 million bonds contribute to financing the war, and each of the 5 loan drives was oversubscribed. What does that mean? They had these loan drives, but when I say oversubscribed, meant that so many people gave more than they even asked for. So Americans were really saying, yes, we need to finance this. So Americans were really into Liberty loans. We're really into giving loans. Each of the loan drives was a great success. The United States government raised a grand total of $21 billion as loan drives. The American people also voluntarily gave to private organizations which conducted programs to help the war effort, and these were used to aid American troops overseas. So when they said this is going to go directly to the troops overseas, yes, those companies, those private organizations, private people jumped in to help finance the war. Not just through taxes, not just through loans, but they just routinely gave money to support our troops. So you can see the patriotism is very high with World War I. Turn your silver into bullets at the post office. I thought this is very interesting. For home and country, Victory loans, and here's her family of a soldier. Here's this little girl. My daddy bought me a government bond of the Third Liberty loan. Did yours? Picture. This is my fight too. Women, put at ease war bonds. Women buying war bonds. Women help America's sons win the war by Liberty loan bonds. Help crush the menace of the seas here with Liberty loan. All of these pamphlets and posters went out for loan drives, and Americans showed up magnificently. Mobilizing industry, the War Industries Board. So industry and technological facilities geared towards wartime operation now. And President Wilson granted regulatory authority over food production, transportation, and communication. So Wilson's saying, okay, now we need to, basically, we may have to ration food. We may have to ration transportation because we need to transport a lot of soldiers. And we need to be wise about our communications too. So taking that granting authority, the president had authority and the government would have authority over these areas. Industry gave their full support. And to cooperate efforts, the War Industries Board was created. So think of War Industry Board. So we're in war and the industry's now getting involved, right? With the government's actually getting involved in industries, I should say. Basically, the War Industries Board would set the prices of war materials and authorize to tell manufacturers what to produce. So they could say, okay, we need you have you produce bullets now, right? Instead of railroad ties, let's make bullets or whatever was needed in quantities, and actually tell how many quantities, how much they needed to sell, and what they needed to do. And industries cooperated greatly at this time because we were at war. The chairman of the War Industries Board was Bernard Baruch, and he basically became an extremely powerful American in economic affairs, because being involved in this at this time gave him that authority, which was very powerful, right? So here we have, just think of Bernard Baruch, and you see right here, the War Industries Board. Control of Americans' railroads. Well, railroads need to haul an awful lot of men to go to war, right? So Secretary of the Treasury was William G. McAdoo. And so he combined the railroads into one large railroad system. And he eliminated any competition from the railroads at all. And he pooled all the equipment, eliminated the passengers' trains, basically wouldn't be able to hold a lot of other passengers because they had to haul war materials and war troops, men, to war. So you couldn't just take a passenger train when you wanted to, right? And also a lot of businesses would not be able to haul a lot of their goods on the trains being occupied. The railroad investors were guaranteed for return on their investments, basically saying, okay, yes, but after the war, we will guarantee your return, which after the war, they did return to private management, but they had many more restrictions. And actually, the railroads never again were to prosper as they had done before. Remember, the railroads had these huge monopolies, and many railroad tycoons had made money prior, but they would never go back to that state, of course. But now we have the railroads now being controlled by the government during this time because we were at war. Shipping Emergency Fleet Corps. So to meet the demand for ships now, we need ships for the war. A shipping board and emergency fleet corporation were created. We need to have someone in charge of making more ships. Our ships had been being sunk by submarines. And so we drastically needed more ships. So this would be responsible, this Shipping Emergency Fleet Corps would be responsible for building a fleet to carry men and materials overseas. New ships were built and others were purchased from various countries that we purchased more ships. We just needed more ships. And the shipping board called into action German ships that had been seized. So we had seized some German ships, and these ships, we actually Americanized them and brought them back against Germany. When the United States entered the war, these German submarines were sinking American freighters faster than they could be built. But by the end of the war, Americans were launching 2 new ships for every lost one. You can imagine. So right away, the German subs were out to sink our ships, knowing that we were bringing supplies. And a lot of our ships are being sunk, right? But we were building them. As we were building more and more new ships, it became that we were basically having a surplus, more surplus of ships than were being sunk, right? Labor. So remember we had during this time before when we were talking about going through during the times of Teddy Roosevelt and Taft, before Wilson, we had all the labor unions were striking, and we had all these, fighting going on between business and labor, right? And so, but during the war, as they looked on, American workers started to cooperate instead of, looking like thinking, oh man, we're at war, so we need to cooperate or else, we may lose this war and lose our lifestyle. So American workers cooperated too. And Samuel Gompers, here's a picture of him here. He of the American Federation of Labor agreed that during the war there would be no strikes at all. He said, this is labor's war and we must support it. So in 1918, the National War Labor Board, it's another board, just remember all these boards, the National War Labor Board of the government was created to act as an arbitration to settle any labor disputes right away. We had no time to settle disputes of labor right now because we were at war. This board was headed by former President William Taft. So here we have Taft. He was the president, our last president before Wilson, right? And so now he's going to say, okay, I'll head it. So he had the National War Labor Board. And also his friend and lawyer, Frank P. Walsh, was with him. So they thought, we'll take care of what's going on with the labor and unions and stuff at this time. And labor and union membership was now encouraged by the government and actually doubled during this time. So by 1920, the AFLs are basically the American Federation of Labor. American Federation of Labor is AFL. Now it's AFL-CIO, which is a pretty liberal organization. But back at this time, it was just the labor. The American Federation of Labor had over 4 million members. Mostly came to members even during wartime. And the cost of living at this time rose, but wages rose even more during the war. So the war actually was cluing us into prosperity more than not, right? As the people cooperated, even together we win. Labor unions and businesses together. Here they are as a picture. The past is behind us, the future is ahead. Let's all strive to make the future better and brighter than the past ever was. And here we have, basically we have the soldier here working with the labor person together. Work or fight. Race, gender, and the draft in the world. Work or fight. So either they had to go to work or you're going to have to go to war. You're going to have to be a soldier. So here's the picture here. The federal agency which acted to mediate and quickly settle labor disputes here. So pressured industry to keep workers happy. And increased wages and shorter work days and all these things. They said, basically, let's make sure everything goes peacefully in this area because we have no time for violent strikes. Food for troops. Food was needed for American troops. They had to aid the Europeans too, because in Europe now, food was needed as, Europe at that point, the British, French, and all of the Allies were in need of food. They had fought for 2 years so far. And so America, in supplying food to the troops was very important because the food supply had diminished due to the war in Europe. So the Food Administration was created under the leadership of Herbert Hoover. Here's a picture of him, Hoover, and he's lived 1874 to 1964. Very important because he would become one of our presidents in the future, presidents of the United States in the future, Herbert Hoover. And he was well known for his relief work among the suffering people of Belgium. So he had already helped the people of Belgium earlier in the war, and now he was going to be the food administrator. So everyone looked to him, and what to do. And so Hoover said, the American people are the most cooperative people in the world, he said. We need not to have any compulsory rationing. He said, we're not going to have to ration America because America wants to ration itself. And isn't that amazing that he said that? Because saying American people are the most cooperative people in the world. Of course, everyone would love him. And then, like I say, he's going to become one of our next presidents. So anyway, many people turned their backyards into victory gardens. So here they are. Okay, we need to raise food. Let's put forth a garden and raise some vegetables so that we can have food and we can basically have food for ourselves. And basically now we can send the food that we were buying to the front lines of the war. So most Americans voluntarily rationed their own food and supplies. Here's some pictures. We are saving you. You save food. Basically saying the soldiers say, we're saving you. Will you save food for us? Don't waste bread. Save 2 thick slices of bread every day. Defeat the U-boat. I love that. Defeat the submarines. Let's save some bread. Sir, don't waste while your wife saves. Adopt the doctrine of a clean plate. Basically saying, don't need a lot of food to eat. Clean your plate up and that's where it really started. Have you ever heard your parents, which I never said, but a lot of parents saying, you need to clean your plate. You need to eat everything. And those times you had to eat everything on there because you could not waste food, especially during war times. A victory garden here. Here's a picture of some of the food that was sent. Fuel administration. Okay, one big thing that saved fuel is that we started daylight savings times. So if you ever have the questions, how in the world did we get all involved with this daylight savings times when we have to, spring ahead and fall back? Remember, daylight savings times that we have now? It actually started during war times to save fuel. So daylight savings times would happen in the summer, so we had longer days. And so basically, that would keep us from having to use so much fuel as we were up during those days. So August of 1917, the Fuel Administration was established. This is another board. Fuel Administration Board was established to supervise the rationing of fuel in factories and in homes. Coal was especially needed. That was the main energy criterion was coal, because every single American needed coal for their fuel to heat up their homes. So during the summer months, the nation saved fuel by switching to daylight savings times. But many Americans cooperated with fuel saving not to drive their automobiles on Sundays and holidays. Basically saying, let's save fuel. We're not going to drive our cars so much either to save fuel. Save gasoline, save coal. So they have a gasless Sunday, heatless Monday, nightless nights, or lightless nights, meaning turn your lights off, save fuel, turn your lights, daylight saving time, all these things to save fuel during the war. So shut that door, hold the heat in, save fuel at work, shut the doors and shut the windows. Keep it warm. Cooperation for victory, American patriotism. So American people gave their full support. Thousands of women, and many of these women had never worked before, they were homemakers, they joined the industrial force to fill in the gap left by men who were serving in the armed forces. So as men had to go out to be soldiers in the war, women came in and became jobs in the factories, working as jobs in the factories. So from homemakers, they learn how to here's a picture of making missiles and bullets. Some women carrying supplies, women here going out and farming and bringing in. It said, for a healthy, happy job, join the Women's Land Army. It's called the Women's Land Army. So retired men also went to the production lines too for industry. And children collected scrap metal and peach stones for gas mask filters. So I guess they use those. I have to look that up, but that's new to me. But a committee on public information was formed to boost support, and it carefully planned a campaign to keep morale high And so you'd see a lot of patriotic billboards, and they got a lot of patriotic speakers came out to give patriotic addresses to unify all the people in the United States of America. And the rallies were huge. There were large rallies of people coming to support the war effort. So women now, before being homemakers, they're coming in and working in the factories. Espionage Act. So on June 1917, the Congress adopted what's called the Espionage. When you think of Espionage Act, you think of spies, because espionage is another way to say spy, or another spy, espionage, same thing. It's kind of a short, they took spy out of espionage to make that word. So anyway, so of June 1917, Congress adopted this act, which provided stiff penalties for anyone who aided the enemy. And if anyone aided the enemy or obstructed recruiting or encouraged insubordination in the armed forces, all these things would be taken harshly by the government in the Espionage Act. The act later amended to include also punishment for anyone that was hindering bond sales. So if you came in and hindered Liberty Bond sales or war production of supplies, you could be called a spy or an espionage. So they were pretty strict. But the thing is, at this time, most Americans were basically behind to support the war. If you would, it said, one said, if you utter, print, write, or published any disloyal, profane, scurrilous or abusive language about the United States or its government, you can be considered on the espionage. So you couldn't write, print, or publish anything that was disloyal to the United States or profane. This generated some people to say they were interfering with the basic individual rights in the Constitution, right, for free speech. But the Supreme Court upheld the Espionage Act amendments by ruling that what may be acceptable as free speech under ordinary circumstances may be dangerous to the nation in times of war. Basically saying the Espionage Act should be enacted during times of war. Because we're at war, for goodness sakes. It says, loose lips might sink ships. So this is the Espionage Act of 1917. Here's spy versus spy. Prohibited any attempt to interfere with military operations, to support Americans' enemies during wartime, to promote insubordination in the military, or to interfere with military recruitment. You were considered a spy, right? I pledge allegiance and silence about the war. These pictures. So Espionage Act, very important. We never had done this before. Eugene Debs was arrested. Okay, who is Eugene Debs? Well, he was, as you recall, he was the one that was stirring up labor unions to fight, and he was very socialistic, and he actually became candidate for the Communist Party. So he was actually arrested. One of the few people arrested under the Espionage Act was Eugene Debs. And he was very much an influential socialist leader. And he is under the influence of Debs and other socialist thinkers, the Radical Industry Workers of the World, IWW, became the only significant group to openly oppose Americans' role in World War I. So basically saying Eugene Debs and his Radical Industry Workers world power there, he said, of the world, Communist Party leader, he was against the war. And so because of what he was saying, he was ended up put in jail. So later on, he'd come out and speak again for communists in America. So he was about the only one, basically the only group, I should say, not the only one, but the only group to oppose America in World War I at this time. The American Creed. This was put together at the end of World War I in 1918. It's written by William Tyler Page. It was adopted by the U.S. House of Representatives in 1918. So William Tyler Page. It says, I believe in the United States of America as a government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the governed, a democracy in a republic, a sovereign nation of many sovereign states, a perfect union, one and inseparable, established upon these principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity, for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to support its Constitution, to obey its laws, to respect its flag, and to defend it against all enemies. The American Creed. Be kind of hard right now to say this American Creed to some in some places of America, but back then that's what people basically stood in America. They stood up for the American Creed. Their duty to their country, to love their country, support its Constitution, obey its laws, respect its flag, and to defend it against all of our enemies. That's how I'm going to end, and we're going to go into now, as Americans go into war, what's going to be happening over there in Europe, and how long did this war go, and what happened after the war. So let's stop there.